Please welcome Jody and our streaming media panel.
Hello. Thank you so much for the introduction and for being here. With that, I want to introduce, or let them introduce themselves. But first, Sharon from NowThis.
Hi, guys. Am I on? I am on. Okay, I don't know. Sharon, Mussalli, nice to be here. Thank you guys for having me. I am currently the CEO of NowThis. Started this role November 30th, actually, so about 2.5 months in. Prior to, I had my own media rep firm for about a year. Before that was the chief revenue officer of Some Spider Studios, which was another publishing brand of a similar sort of size and nature. We exited that to Bustle Digital Group and also a little bit to Vox, ironically. And before that was all over media, but I guess also relevant to this conversation is I worked at Meta for a number of years where I led the entertainment team. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Virgil, we're excited to have you as well.
Virgil Waters. I work with Scripps. I work on the ad tech side of the business. We're primarily, I don't know how many people are really familiar with Scripps, but we have some of the largest fast distribution channels. We have Scripps News, we have Court TV, we have Ion Television, we have Bounce TV, and we also have 60 to 70 local stations. So we are in the process of combining those businesses and those product offerings for advertisers. So we have like 600 local ad sellers working with primarily regional or small businesses. And then we have the national brands and our national audience. So.
Cool. Yeah, look, I was thinking about this panel, and it talks about video monetization. And I was, first and foremost, thought it was interesting, the term video monetization in publishing is so far-reaching. There's so many different forms of video, whether it be in-stream and out-stream, social, vertical, horizontal, linear, CTV, AVOD, FAST. I think goes on and on. So I thought it would be helpful because, I think there's a lot of different perspectives depending on which type of video. So I thought maybe talk about each of you where you're focusing within the video landscape because it's so vast.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go first. So at NowThis, I think you know us all for this, and we remained this type of publisher, but we're creating a ton of video on a daily basis. We are constantly producing video for consumption, largely on social. Our 3 primary platforms are Instagram, TikTok, and Snap. We are also on YouTube. We are also on Facebook, X, Threads, everywhere else, but we focus on these 3 core platforms that are really most important to 18 to 34-year-olds. Those platforms, in turn, as we all know, focus largely on vertical video that is, a few minutes in length. And so what you're really seeing from us is highly topical, highly relevant, fresh content on a daily basis distributed on those platforms. We also know that over time, the passive revenue that one might receive from those platforms is getting smaller and smaller with sort of contraction on the CPM basis. So we're not relying on passive monetization through interstitial ads, but rather we're finding ways to integrate brands. This is nothing new, nothing surprising, into that experience because we do incredibly well. We have 91 million fans and followers across all the platforms. Our engagement rates are pretty high for those platforms. We're considered, so in some fashion, a gold standard on those platforms when we talk to our platform partners. So it's how do we continue to do that better, respond to what's working and what our audiences want, and then find ways to integrate brands. And that's truly the bread and butter of what we do.
Great.
Yeah, at Scripps, you can think of us as a traditional media company. So when you think of the local television, traditionally out of linear, but we've been very aggressive in our push to distribute to the channels she talked about, like FAST and there's not as much Instagram and stuff, but like YouTube TV, we have partnerships and we move our content continuously to those channels, but also like our distribution into FAST, into CTV, supporting every local station to have a CTV app, to have their live streams on the app, to be able to alert their community about news events, about weather events, traffic, stuff like that. And at the core of Scripps is Scripps News, and the core ethos is we were every man's newspaper. So we're not exactly the New York Times. We go down a very middle of the road news first type of focus, and so I've heard a lot of conversations about fragmentation and different avenues for people and different viewing habits and all this and that. And I think about that fragmentation in terms of like the advertisers and also distribution. So we're starting to work more and more in sports, and some of the problems that regional sports companies have had, some bankruptcies and failures and things, and their ability, you know, for like NHL to get the distribution they need. We're working with women's soccer. We're working with WNBA. I believe we have 2 games a week now during the season on ION, which reaches like 95% of American households. We're providing those different distribution points. So video, yes, there's online video, there's CTV in the app video. Our primary revenue drivers are still, we call it glass on the wall, a high premium video experience of television, whether it's fast or linear or even OTA. They're still all there, and they're still all valuable assets for the brand marketers and all marketers, really.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's great to see the different places. I mean, we work at GAMURS. We have in-stream and out-stream video, and even seeing those as elements, kind of companion pieces to content consumption, versus kind of being the primary source, which is where you guys focus. Sharon, I was really excited because I've been a fan of NowThis for a long time. Got to work with the brand at Group 9 for a bunch of years. It is an amazing brand at captivating a generation interested in just kind of the topics of today. But at the same time, as we saw with today's news, that a lot of businesses there have kind of been evolving their business model. You're new there. I was kind of curious, as you think about monetization and building out the revenue for that company, what are you focused on? Like, what do you think are the key drivers to evolve and kind of improve and continue to improve monetization for the business?
What's not a secret, I'm sure you've read in all the trades, is NowThis has gone through sort of a series of different ownerships over the past couple of years, switched hands a couple of different times. And I think when I walked in, the team had sort of paused at where it was, at one point in time. And after going through these sequences, over 2 or 3 years, the consumer changes dramatically. What they're watching, how the platforms distribute that content, what they're looking for has changed. And so what I think when we talk about evolution and where we're going forward with NowThis, when I walked in the door, I'm sure my insights team loved me. I was like, I need a massive, rigorous study of all of our content by platform, by topic, by asset type, sub 60 vertical, greater than 60-second vertical, still, carousel, 16 by 9, name the topics and the different types of things that we create. And then I looked at a full year of content and what was performing. And it was very quick and easy to see when you have a large scale data set, what has been working and what hasn't. We took all the analyses by platform to our platform reps. Again, having worked at one of the platforms, I'm very fond of these platforms and I'm a big fan of them. And I think working with them is really important, right? Because they are your channels and they determine your success or lack thereof. And so we took our analysis and our theses about what we should and should not be doing to the various platforms, got confirmation from them, and then use that to sort of recalibrate what we should be creating, where should we be distributing, and what works. And so that was how we did it from a bottoms up, I would say, data-driven perspective. And so you're seeing things like I'm rebranding the various feeds that we have on Instagram and TikTok. We're narrowing the focus of the content so it's slightly more predictable when you're a consumer of what you should expect, as opposed to a mixed bag of different topic on a wider sort of aperture channel, for example. And so that's some of the ground up work we're doing. And then when you look top down, you say, what is really popular on TikTok, Instagram, and Snap? And I am not embarrassed to say that I spend endless hours. I love TikTok and I'm always on it and I'm always seeing what's trending. And you see a couple of key things. Like, one is faces and creators, right? I love that person. They're so amazing. You all see it. You scroll through and there's a magnetic narrator and you're like, what is that? And you stop. There's a curiosity gap that you want satiated by finishing the video and so on. And I think the other part of it, and something I'm really focusing on as well, is series. If you look at some of what's happening in the trades, and we're seeing what's happening with BuzzFeed and Complex, what's the one brand or the couple of brands that were held back outside of the Complex sale? And they were the food brands, right? They were First We Feast and so on. Why? Compelling host, compelling narrator. The minute you see that black background and the hot sauce, you know exactly what's going to happen. It is a really recognizable series that has a tremendous amount of value. So I think understanding what's working bottoms up platform level using the data married with sort of what people are consuming is dictating our strategy moving forward. And I think if I can get that sweet spot together of sort of focusing on what's working and adding in what people want, that's what we're going to be taking to market. You'll see as we evolve our narrative for monetization.
Just following on that, and I know it's early days for you. Are there platforms that you see prioritizing or not that you can share, or places like, I mean, even maybe whether it's Reels versus feed, even within the platforms, but are there places that you've already seen that are like, we're going to lean in there more than we have, and maybe, or vice versa, ones you're going to deprioritize?
Yeah, definitely. My priority now is Instagram, Snap, and TikTok. Those three, maybe not exactly in that order. It's funny, I think sometimes people aren't talking about Snap as much, but Snap does incredibly well for us, like hundreds of millions of views, really, really high engagement rate, highly saturated US domestic audience, which is where all of our operations are, right? We're not an international company. All of these things really matter to us. Decent RPMs. There's a lot of good things about Snap, so I'm actually a very big fan of Snap. And then, you know, again, personal TikTok fan, but also I think TikTok is incredibly relevant to our audiences, and we're seeing, you know, for us, it's still the vertical video. I know they're trying to gain traction with 16:9 video and people rotating, or 10-minute long videos and so on. Perhaps that becomes something for us. But I think the core products for us really are vertical videos that largely live on Instagram within Reels, and then Snap, obviously, you know, within the ecosystem, and then, TikTok rather, within their ecosystem, and then Snap. And the last thing I'll say, what might be an interesting data point, so what we did find, it's very interesting how the two Instagram Reels and Snap behave differently. Instagram Reels, 25% of our content attributes to 90% of our success, meaning obviously it's hits and misses, it's stochastic, but it is far more stochastic on TikTok. 10% of our content contributes to 90% of our success, right? So it's a little bit more of a needle in a haystack, I think, on TikTok to find the one that's going to hit, as opposed to on Instagram, it's a slightly wider, larger swath of content that contributes to our growth. So we're trying to figure out what is that smaller subset on TikTok that works incredibly well versus what works on Instagram.
Yeah, I've heard that from a bunch of creators as well, which is when you have a big following on Instagram, you kind of know what your audience, a little bit, you're going to have a sense of what your audience is going to be on a post. On TikTok, it is so variable. The smallest person can have a crazy viral, and the biggest person can have tons of videos that fall on deaf ears, if you will. Thank you for that. Virgil, I heard an interview of last week, and we actually, I think, heard a little bit yesterday about publishers going into the fast space. This was, the interview I heard was a publisher, a very well-known, so like what I would have called a social-first publisher in the video space, who was really kind of betting the monetization future of their brand on being able to have more standardized ad units via fast distribution. But it's definitely not just this easy holy grail for digital publishers. Can you talk through like what you see as what a brand would need to, if they were interested in that? Because I think it's definitely new to a lot of people, and people see it as a way in to TV that maybe weren't TV first. What advice do you have, or what do you see as what's needed there?
I think the reason, like, we have some of the, like, every major fast distributor, we're 3 of the top 10 channels. So we were there first, and I think that's because of our ethos of, like, the everyman newspaper. Like, we want to have our distribution out there. As people are cutting their cable, are moving their viewing habits to streaming, online, different viewing habits, we want to be there for them. And we want to support our advertisers, because people forget, like, as they move off there and they move to this more fragmented marketplace, if you will, the traditional advertisers still want that audience. So it's like, I don't have the same reach over here. How am I going to achieve my marketing goals? And I'm not going to preach to, like, the big 3 about their streaming goals, because, you know, if one of those guys dumps $100 billion worth of their content library onto a fast, we won't be number 1. But they have different models of paywalls and subscription-based and SVOD and things like that. So, like another channel like ours, it's work. That's why it's not easy to catch up with it, because every platform is a different agreement. It's a different arrangement. It's a different amount of work. One of the things we're doing is, because in our heart we're a news organization, and we have 60, 70 local stations, we're supporting them. So we have these relationships we've had for 10 years with these platforms, and we're now getting to get 60, 70 live stream local stations onto these platforms, geo-targeted. They're not going to distribute Tampa Bay local affiliate station nationwide, and we don't want them to. But it's work. It's work to get all these things set up. We've consolidated our national and local brands, and it's something interesting that we're very different businesses. What you talk about, the needle in the haystack, you can think about that also for local news. You're plugging along, doing your stories every day, things that impact the community, but you're barely making a living. You're barely making it, and then boom, something hits. Something's of national importance, and it gets. You need that distribution mechanism. You need that mechanism to monetize, because that's the gravy. That's when a train derailment, a hurricane, a tornado, this or that, even like a local scandal that has national implication, anything like that is important news. You want the reporters there. You want them making a living. And to do that, they need to monetize. So like we have a couple hundred people developing the apps, the CTV apps and the apps for Apple TV and stuff like that, for each of these stations. And it's one team working on, they're customized for each one, but now it's all in one code base, where it wasn't that way 2 years ago. And it was a different expense model. So you have to tell me which type of publisher you want to get that wants to get into the FAST ecosystem.
Well, I imagine a lot of publishers are thinking, is this right for me? I mean, I think you see that across all these, speaking as one who started when we're constantly saying, what are the next phases of distribution, types of content we should get into? What would be your recommendation? I mean,
well, it's a similar business model to traditional television. You have to produce enough content to have a channel. You can't just have a couple, 30-minute videos or 60-minute videos that are popular or whatever, and say that's going to be the foundation of my FAST channel. You need to have 12 hours, 24 hours worth of programming. So that's one thing. But it has tremendous distribution. We reach 95% of U.S. households.
So I'm curious about distribution. We talk about needle in a haystack. Publishing groups like this are good at talking about stuff that we understand. We talk about fast channels. I think we identify it. But does the consumer, not saying the term fast channel, but I was with a friend who was like, I bought a new TV. There's channels you can just watch stuff.
Yeah, that's
and
fast.
that was very early discovery for them, and they had no idea. I'm curious, there's a lot of brands rushing into it, but are consumers adapting? What are you guys seeing from a viewership standpoint?
That's the thing. That's why everybody's talking about it, because we have a traditional linear business, and people are actually very interesting. 20 years ago, everybody said over the air was dead because the cable companies had moved in, and it died. It slowly died, but it plateaued at 25%. And over the last 3 years, that's actually been growing. So people watching television on an antenna has been growing over the last 3 years. It's not growing 50% a year or something like that, but it's growing significantly at 10, 15% because of cord cutters. People who've said, okay, I'm just going to watch Netflix, or I'm just going to watch, Paramount Plus or HBO Max, but I still want to watch my local news. I still want to watch my local sporting events and things like that. And so they've turned back to the over-the-air. And we actually have a product called Tableau. Are y'all familiar with that? It's a digital antenna, but it's like a Roku device. So we have all our channels on it, plus we have 100 other channels like AMC and all this and that, like Roku. But it provides TiVo, I don't know if I can say TiVo, it's a brand name, but recording capabilities, DVR.
I still say TiVo stuff, and my kids look at me like, what are you talking about?
DVR capabilities for all your channels plus your local channels. So you can record the high school basketball game if you're not going to be able to catch it and you want to see it or something like that. So it's a digital antenna, and that makes it available for all your TVs that have Wi-Fi. So all the new smart TVs have Wi-Fi, and you can have 4 TVs in your house and 1 Tableau and 1 antenna, and then you can watch, without cable, you can watch all your local stations. Typical in Atlanta market, we have 120 local stations that you can get digitally for free over the air.
It's exciting. I think it's still so early in that kind of the evolution of TV going to the complete cord cutting. I want to take a turn to the content creation for a second. Sharon, I'm mindful, the social platforms, I think, most publishers want to be there, but it's really filled with creators. And, I think trying to understand that, like between brands who want to be there and our creators themselves versus individual creators, like how do you look at creators and embrace them within trying to be a publisher that has its own brand, but I think platforms that individuals kind of stand out.
I think part of what I sort of wanted to bring to NowThis when I came here is that everybody who works at a company like a NowThis, and I'm not going to speak for peers of mine, but I bet you they might be feeling the same, is you are a creator. You are employed by NowThis to be maybe somebody who's on camera or somebody who writes or somebody who finds stories. What do you think these people are doing in I say in their mom's living room, sometimes I joke, but it's like, what do you think they're doing? They're finding these great stories, or they're telling them in a compelling fashion, they're posting and publishing them, they're editing them with CapCut and other tools that they have on their phone, and they're creators. We're not really that different. So if you think of it that way and say, but we have greater access to resources, and we have a collective hive of minds that can think about the best way to produce or find the right angle on a story, we should be doing it obviously as well, hopefully, if not better, than the greater creator ecosystem. But I think part of what my remit has been coming in is to remind everyone that we're all part of this greater universe. Now, we have to create a brand that pops. We need to, when people see a piece of content within the first 5 seconds, they need to know that it came from us. How do we tell the story differently? I was in a content meeting, I think yesterday, right before I left. I don't even know anymore, time is blurring. But to that end, I would say to them, if we're not additive to the conversation, then we shouldn't necessarily be in the conversation. I'm not necessarily so concerned about volume of output, although I do think you need sort of a threshold, bare minimum volume of output to maintain this relationship with your audience, but rather shouldn't each piece of content be additive? So I see us as part of the greater ecosystem. I think media companies and brands that have the ability to adapt so as to be as fast moving, and in some ways even as lightweight. I don't think the consumer is expecting as glossy or highly produced pieces of content, which then creates drag in your system and you can't keep up with the pace and the velocity of the content. I think if you put yourself in that environment and you say, but we should be better at storytelling and we should have really, really high brand recognition, then you put yourself in a good place to be complementary and hopefully superior in a space where people are expecting that type of content.
Awesome. Well, I see Steve has stood up, so I think do we have time to switch to Q&A?
Yeah, we have time for audience Q&A.
Are there any questions?
Yep.
So I was struck by the Vice News that they were moving from website publishing to social channels. It's kind of like the death knell for website news publishing. Are you worried now, like that people have discovered your secret sauce and that there will be hyperfragmentation?
So we were never, as I think as you know, you're referencing here too, we were never really a .com publisher. We never really employed a room of writers and we're driving traffic there. No, I mean, I compliment to Vice. I think Vice does an unbelievable job on social. I follow them. I was just mentioning that today. I have forward stories and so on. You can't get more competition in the creator space. I mean, again, it's my love for TikTok and Instagram suggests there's a ton of different creators. I really do think it's not necessarily the quantity of creators or the quantity of content, because that essentially is infinite, but rather it's the quality of the storytelling, the quality of the talent, and where you're showing up and where you're choosing to not show up. I think some of what we need to figure out, and maybe some other brands as well, is are we going to show up for every single thing that happens? I have said, Trump ordered to pay $350 million, whatever the heck. Do I need to also say it because my phone lights up 53,000 times from every single app to tell me that this thing happened? If I'm also just saying it too, am I adding to the conversation? Or should I pause, find the ones that make sense for my audience and what they want based on the data, and I know how the platforms behave, and then tell the story that I need to tell that is additive. So I don't quantity of sort of contributors and quantity of content does not worry me as much as our ability to find our own unique voice within that sort of wide landscape.
And if I could ask one second question, are you concerned about the regulatory environment now, like with a lot of attention on young people and COPA compliance and also potential security risks with certain platforms? Is that a fear of yours?
It's not something that comes up. I mean, we don't really target anybody as young as, would be within the COPA compliance. I mean, we're really an 18 to 34-year-old audience. So in that respect, it's not really something that we think about on a daily basis, although I know obviously there are very young consumers on these platforms. And in terms of security and globalization, what I do is I focus a lot on domestic audiences. We are not a company that has a Toronto office, that has a UK office, that has an office in New Zealand or Australia or somewhere else. So we don't really have the resources to service international audiences. So I am trying to fine tune the content to perform as well as possible within a domestic landscape. And I also think we speak to young, progressive American people. And so focusing on issues, focusing on topics that are really interesting to them, then localizes the conversation to a domestic audience, albeit that I know obviously some of the platforms are not American platforms. We really try and focus the audience and the conversation here, but thus far in terms of platforms and globalization of the platforms, it hasn't quite come up as a sort of a major issue for a publisher like NowThis.
Virgil, how are you solving for discoverability on FAST platforms? That grid is getting awfully cluttered. And do you have to do any paid media against it to drive people to it? What's the secret sauce?
We do paid media, and like I talked about, we just relaunched a product, Tableau. We do a lot of paid media around that. We do a lot of paid media to support our local stations in Scripps News and Court TV. But we also work with the actual FAST platforms themselves. You talked about how to, if I'm just a random, I don't mean to say badly, but just a publisher, it's really hard for me to tell you a strategy for FAST. You need to tell me who you are, what your content is, what your content library is, what's your strategy. Because we work with these platforms, they promote us because we're high performing, because we've worked with the advertisers to make sure that our content, that our ad products and things help them accomplish their goals. A lot of these advertisers are traditional linear advertisers, and that audience is shrinking when you think about linear as cable. All those cable cutters means there's less reach for Procter & Gamble, and people talked about, within that, and they need that reach. They need to maintain their market shares, their brand awareness, their brand favorability, things like that. If they don't, somebody else is going to come to us on FAST, reach those audiences, and take market share away from them. So you have to evolve the products, but you have to evolve the advertisers. You have to evolve with the advertisers as they're trying to deal with the fragmented audience.
Okay, but between rev share and promotion, are we talking about a channel that's really profitable yet for the publisher? Between ad rev share and promotion to drive discoverability on these platforms, is it profitable?
Oh, it's extremely profitable.
Okay.
Yeah, it's far more profitable than any, our growth is like 50% a year for the last, I don't know how many years on FAST, and it's extremely profitable, yeah.
Let me ask about TikTok, since Sharon, you raised the topic of how difficult discoverability, or how unpredictable TikTok is as a platform. So I'm really curious about the monetization strategy for TikTok, given that unpredictability. You can't make any guarantees there.
Right.
So what's the actual business model for being on TikTok for you?
Exactly right. You cannot guarantee, I think as we all know, that the 90+% of the time spent on TikTok is in FYP. It is not in following. So there's also this really interesting thing whereby, I'm sure you've all experienced it, you follow something or someone you like, and then all of a sudden you don't see them as much anymore. It's very odd, but I don't write the algorithm. That said, in terms of monetization, it's that it has to be that a brand is being integrated into a vertical, I'm making it up, 2-minute long video, but that 2-minute long vertical video lives across numerous platforms. And so another reason why I like 9:16 vertical video, perhaps slightly more than I do 16:9 video, is that I was just talking about this before the session started today. 16:9 obviously does very, very well on YouTube, can live on Facebook, but that's not the right platform for us today. I think TikTok is experimenting with put the 16:9 and turn your screen. There's no data there yet. It does not do very well, obviously, on Instagram. And so it has limitations in a way vertical does not. So in terms of monetization, it's making that guarantee to the advertiser that 9:16 will live across Shorts, which actually does do very well for us on YouTube, TikTok, and then within Instagram Reels, and then all of a sudden a cross-platform guarantee across the same 18 to 34 audience does much better, to your point, than localizing it strictly to TikTok, which is really what the person or the advertiser is trying to get to.
So if it goes nuts on TikTok,
amazing.
It's just a
it's a plus.
It's a bonus for them.
And we're everywhere that 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 advertiser would like to be with that audience with the piece of content they've approved.
Well, we have to go to break. Jody, panel, thanks so much.
Thank you.